Hello, and welcome back to Grow, GoldStar's Resource and Opportunities Workshop. Once again, I'm Ford Chumley, and today we are joined by Caeli Duerson, GoldStar's Speech Therapy Manager, who will be presenting on enhancing your child's communication skills by advocating across providers and further developing language skills your child already possesses. As always, please be sure to type any questions and comments in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to join the conversation. Without further ado, take it away, Caeli.
All right, thanks so much, Ford. So hi, I'm Caeli Duerson. I am the speech therapist manager here at GLOW, and I want to talk a little bit today about advocating for all of our clients across different communication settings and different environments. So a little bit about me. I have been a speech therapist for almost 12 years now, and I've worked in the school settings for 7-8 years, including 2 districts in Colorado and 2 out of state, one in Alaska and one in Hawaii. So I've gotten to see kind of a wide array of the school settings and what it kind of looks like on both the educational side as well as the medical side. I worked in the hospital and medical settings for a couple of years also, as well as in-home and in clinic. So I've had a great opportunity to really get to see what services can look like across providers, across settings, and across contexts, which gives some good information on kind of figuring out how we can all advocate and support our clients and for your children. So that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So in this presentation, we'll be talking about the areas that speech therapy can work on in order for you to better understand what skills you can advocate for, how to identify where your child's skills and abilities are related to language and communication, identify what foundational skills are needed to build on communication skills, how to use simple strategies to enhance foundational skills and communication skills as a whole, and how to collaborate and advocate with members of your child's team. So first, let's think about what are all the skills that speech language pathologists can work on. And not everybody knows exactly what that looks like. I think sometimes people might have a view that we work on speech sounds and maybe some expressive language skills, but there's a whole lot of different areas that we work on, and recognizing those can be helpful, because if you can know that is what your speech therapist works on, you can get a better idea of, okay, this is something I would like to see improvements in, and thinking about how that enhances their overall communication with others is something to kind of keep in mind. So that's what we kind of look at, is how do all these different areas impact their ability to connect with others and communicate. So here's a few of the areas we work on. We work on language, which includes that receptive, expressive, and pragmatic language, which I'll talk a little bit about, speech sound production, cognition, cognitive skills, use of augmentative alternative communication systems, swallowing and feeding difficulties, fluency, and voice disorders. So kind of talking a little bit about each of those areas. Receptive language is more that comprehension piece. So it's following directions, comprehension of different language concepts, understanding what gestures might mean, kind of using that nonverbal language, responding to questions, identifying objects and pictures. So those are all examples of receptive language abilities. Expressive language is use of vocabulary, using words, phrases, and sentences for different communication functions or purposes, the reasons we communicate, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Grammar forms within our verbal, or if your kiddo has a device, through using the device, what that kind of looks like in terms of grammar forms and sentence structure and all of that, as well as semantics. So understanding word meaning, understanding figurative language or double meaning words, all of that. And again, we really target, especially here at GoldStar, a lot of our kiddos who have different means of communication beyond verbal language. So we use AAC devices and tools to help them communicate. And that can look like low-tech devices, so pictures they might choose from, or high-tech systems, which are more those dynamic screens that can generate speech for them. So there's a lot of different ways to access those, and that's something we kind of teach how to use those and how to best access those for each individual. And then within expressive language, we look a little bit at kind of the functional communication, the reasons we communicate. So we use language to label, to request for things, to make demands of others, protest, saying, no, I don't want to do that, making comments and asking questions. So those are just a couple examples of reasons we might communicate. And we look at each of those and see, is this child using that language verbally or non-verbally? And again, how can we help further support or enhance that? Because every child has reason to want to be able to use all of those language functions and has the right to as well. So we kind of help figure out how to enhance and use those skills. And then pragmatic language is more that social use of language. So that's understanding how to use a variety of social skills, including attending to others around them, social interactions, turn taking, and kind of understanding those unwritten rules or social rules of language is something we work on too. As well as some cognitive skills. So that's an area that can really be addressed throughout the other areas that we work on, because it can impact a child's progress towards using some of those receptive language skills or expressive language skills, for example. So working on attention, their ability to kind of focus and complete tasks, their ability to problem solve, using different memory strategies, sequencing and kind of organizing to complete everyday tasks. So those are all the skills that we work on, again, with our kids up through some of our adults. As well as articulation. So that looks like and other speech sound errors that you might find. So that might be replacing one sound for another or deleting a sound. And so we work on that kind of one step at a time and working on carrying those sounds over across different settings. Fluency is another area we work on, which is, some of you might know it more as stuttering. So that's the interruption in the flow of speech or the rhythm of speech. So we use that different strategies to help kind of enhance fluency in an individual's speech if they need. And last but not least, voice disorders. So speech that's too high or low, or too harsh or breathy. There's different voice disorders that we help work with and kind of use some vocal hygiene and different things to kind of help, and as well as different strategies to help enhance communication also. So that's talking a little bit about what we work on as speech therapists. That was a lot to cover, but thinking about a lot of our kids here at GoldStar, what speech therapy does and what ABA therapy does. This is just kind of a nice little, Venn diagram showing how what we work on along with ABA, how they're the same, and like areas that we work on that are a little bit different. And we can both kind of help each other out in terms of those areas right in the middle there, that functional communication, receptive and expressive language, use of different, prompts and hierarchies, or prompting hierarchies and visual supports, modeling, all those things that help our kids learn in the best way that they can, kind of figuring out what works best for each kiddo. So now that we know a little bit about what speech therapy does, it's important to kind of figure out, in order to advocate, where your child's communication skills are at. So I think first and foremost, using your school or clinic-based speech therapist report and also just that speech therapist to identify the skills that they're working on or that they have kind of told you about that you can work on at home, as well as using the resources that are already out there. So if your kid doesn't receive speech therapy, there's tons of resources out there, including like a developmental milestone chart and progression that also gives different ideas of ways to help advance certain skills, which is great. So the CDC has great resources for that, including an app and like a resource guide. So a whole bunch of different tools that you can access and use, not just for speech, but for gross motor and social emotional growth, all different kinds of areas that they have some really awesome tools to help you use. Third, thinking about your daily routines and how much support you're giving your child. So this is an important piece that I think is really important to reflect on, is thinking about any skill that you feel your child is doing or doing well, and really thinking through what does that look like, how much support am I actually giving them, and in what situations are they doing really well in. So for example, when looking at that receptive language piece, right? So what are they able to comprehend? And thinking about them being able to follow a simple direction, let's say, go get your shoes. So thinking about, okay, how familiar is that direction? Is that something I tell them to do every day at the same time every day? Because if so, that's kind of a routine direction that they're used to hearing versus something that's new or different. And, are you gesturing? Are you, giving a model of what they need to go grab? Are you heading towards that area to kind of indicate like, oh, this is where we need to go to get our shoes? Things like that. They're little things that really make a big difference when you think about, we might not think of it as support, but they're little cues and little hints that help all of our children do well with certain tasks and activities, which is great, but it's also something to think about that they need those supports to help them succeed with that given task. So keeping that in mind when you think about all your daily routines and what speech works on, that's a good way to think about it and kind of figure out where would your child be without those supports and what can it look like with those supports. And last but not least, just asking additional questions of your speech therapist or speech therapist assistant on exactly what they're capable of doing in the speech room, as well as what they've seen in other settings. So we next want to talk a little bit about knowing what factors might affect communication skills. And I think this is one of the biggest factors that really plays into seeing a child or adult make success towards their goals or developing skills, is really looking at what barriers might be getting in the way, or what foundational skills might they need in order to make progress. So there are different foundational skills that we all need to kind of grow and blossom in before we can work on that language comprehension and that expressive language and that articulation of speech sounds. And those are listed here. And on the next slide, it is displayed a little more nicely as a visual to help you really envision what I'm kind of explaining here. But some other factors that also are worth mentioning are things like sensory regulation. So a person's ability to kind of regulate and process, their sensory needs. I think if you're watching this, you might know a little bit about your child's sensory needs and things that they need in order to help them really focus and listen and pay attention, and just helping with the whole learning process. It really is important for us to be regulated in our own way. And for everybody, that looks a little bit different. So keeping that in mind, as well as knowing that obviously those physiological needs and safety needs also play a huge factor. So once we have those kind of under control a little bit, then we can kind of work on those foundational skills. And that is where this beautiful communication tree kind of comes in handy. I like to think about this when I think, oh, this student I have isn't quite making progress in this area. Are there any of these foundational skills that maybe are lacking, or, a little bit more piecemeal that we can help develop? So in order to build that understanding, which is that trunk of the tree, we need these other skills. We need to work and help them understand turn taking, understand really listening, um, use of play skills, use of shared attention. So that's attention with somebody else, and kind of knowing somebody else is there and attending with them, as well as motivation to communicate, and use of social communication. So those are all really at the root of all of the other language areas that we want to see blossom and grow. So before even you can build expressive language, you have to have that understanding of what different words and vocabulary and nonverbal language, what all of that means. You need to be able to attend. You need to be able to have those play skills to really, be able to help you build all of these other skills. So that understanding is the tree trunk, and looking up at the top of the tree, we have that expressive language. And within that also are those areas where we're more refining that speech and looking at the areas of speech sounds, fluency again, which is that stuttering, voice. And if you look up at the sun is kind of what, it's metaphorically what makes the tree kind of grow, and that's opportunities for communication. So there's a lot of different opportunities for communication that can help our language grow, as well as stimulation. So being really interested in what they're doing and making it fun and engaging and making them really interested. So those are all things to think about when we're thinking about barriers or things that might be getting in the way or hindering communication in all of these ways. So now that we know a little bit about some barriers or some foundational skills that we really need to advance before helping, really work on those receptive, expressive, and social language skills. Now that we know all that, we can think about how to use simple strategies to enhance those foundational skills. So first is, I think, just a big one is creating opportunities for communication. So really, as much as for any parent, it's so easy to just know what our kids want and what they need every day, because we're with them, and we're the one person that can understand them. Pointing to the cabinet might mean that they want their Pringles. We can't always anticipate or guess what our child wants, because what that does is it limits opportunities for communication. You want to give them that opportunity to be able to tell us what they want or what they need, because maybe they want something different that day, or maybe, and again, maybe doing that will help advance their ability to make choices or to verbalize to us what they want. So, so that's just a big thing to keep in mind, is really just not anticipating what they want and kind of letting them have that opportunity to verbalize or show us in some way what they want or what they need. Also observing how they request or engage with their therapists, and holding a close expectation for what abilities they have for communicating is really important. So kind of seeing what the therapist does and kind of having your expectation be pretty close to that in terms of like, oh, what they're capable of doing, and how to kind of give them that support in order to get that communication out. Also making sure that you're using these opportunities across different places and with different people. So a big part of that is maybe changing things up, trying something new or different out of your child's routine, even just once a week, trying to go to a new or different place that they might not have been to before, will give them plenty of amazing opportunities to maybe communicate and request for something different, or comment on something that's happening, or find that they really enjoy that something different that they're now able to see. And last but not least, trying to honor their requests or their protests, particularly if it's something new or different. So if you've never heard your child request to go get ice cream, and this is something maybe that they really love ice cream, but they've never requested it before, I would say that is the time to get your keys, go to your car, and take them and give them whatever ice cream flavor that they want, because I think it's really important for them to recognize, hey, when I'm communicating something different or new, they're hearing me, and they understand that my communication has meaning, and they want to honor that. And again, we can't do that all the time, and that's understandable. But definitely there are times where if it's something new or different, and when kids are learning to make requests or protest against something and say, no, I don't want to do that, that we honor that. So we show that their verbal or communication on their talker or their gestural communication has meaning over, behaviors or screaming or yelling or just being upset that they're not, being heard, because they don't know how to communicate that. So the next area to kind of look at enhancing those foundational skills is using language stimulation techniques. So that's modeling sentences during their play or conversation. So just an example we gave here is just commenting on what you do, saying, or what they're doing. Oh, you're pushing the train into the tunnel. This really gives them language that maybe they're not generating on their own, or they're not hearing otherwise, that they're now, even if they're not repeating it, they're really soaking it in and hearing what we're saying, and learning to kind of understand that. Rephrasing sentences back to the child. So for example, if your child says, Sam, box, jump, you might say, Sam jumped on the box. Repeating and adding language. So if your child says, bear, eat, the adult might kind of expand on that and add some language in there. The bear is eating the porridge. As well as positive reinforcement for any attempts to communicate verbally or non-verbally. Again, especially when it's something new or different. And then thinking about those foundational skills, ways to enhance or grow those specific foundational skills for communication. Ways to enhance turn taking might look like practicing taking turns with your child in whatever activities that are motivating for them, whether that be tickling, board games, turns with a toy. To work on listening and attention, breaking longer directions into smaller, simpler chunks. Helping improve that motivation to communicate. I think the most important thing there really is making sure you're engaging in the things that they want to engage in, and really incorporating yourself into those and seeing, hey, when mom joins in on this game, it can be really fun, and it can be even more interesting because I can do even more with this activity. Working on their play skills, kind of being silly and just joining them at whatever play level that they're at. Working on that joint attention can look like giving positive praise and reinforcement when they attend to you. And then social communication as a whole, kind of just giving lots of opportunities for that peer interaction, modeling what good interactions might look like, and verbalizing or explaining how an inappropriate behavior might be inappropriate and a better way to respond. So our last area to kind of look at here, just in terms of enhancing communication across the board, is really knowing how to collaborate and advocate for your child. So part of that is knowing the difference between school-based and outside therapy services, learning to make those services collaborative and effective, and then advocating across those settings. So kind of looking at the difference between school speech services and outside speech services. There's quite a few differences, but I think the big take homes here are that in the schools, it really, in order for a student to qualify for school speech services, they have to be provided through an IEP, which is a legal document, and that they have to show that it impacts their education. So the goals, their minutes that they're seeing through the IEP, all of that has to be reflected in the fact that it impacts their education. So the goals are going to be based on their plans for education and their state standards or their grade level standards or their extended evidence outcomes, which are more those standards that some of our kids might be on that look a little bit different than the grade level standards, but they all have to tie into those standards in some way. Whereas outside speech services do not. They can kind of be more based on, it doesn't have to be based on severity of the delay. It can be functional based on what the parents want or what you want to see across different settings and not just in school. And then kind of looking at the differences in goals and levels of support. This is just an example of what one goal that might look a little bit different in the school versus in a clinic setting. So in a school, for example, if Johnny has difficulty with producing his R's and L's, the school might identify whether or not this impacts his ability to be understood by others at school. To what degree? Does it impact his confidence and participation in the classroom or his reading and writing? And if not, and if it's not significant enough, they cannot see him for that skill because they kind of see it in the school settings as we don't want to take away from their education if it's something that's not impacting directly their abilities in the school. Whereas in a clinic setting, it can look a little bit different. You can target this if it impacts their abilities out in the community or at home, or if they're having a tough time being understood by families. So I know I'm going just maybe a couple of minutes over. I hope that's okay. I just have a couple more slides to get through, and then if we have time, we might be able to answer some questions. But the next slide is kind of looking a little bit at making those services most effective between schools and outside services. So first is knowing your rights, making sure you're really reading those procedural safeguards that are given to you or at least offered to you yearly in the schools. And there's a ton of support groups and things online and out in the community if you aren't sure where to get started. And then helping your team communicate by every year, making sure the release of information form that every district and every clinic or any setting really needs so that the two parties can communicate with each other on goals and progress and all of that. So both sides usually need that done at least once a year. So asking your whole team to get that completed, and you need to sign and fill out a part of that as well. And then asking them to meet at least, once a year, either at the IEP meeting or a short virtual meeting at some point to get everybody on the same page. Staying involved throughout the year is really important as well. So really taking the time to thoroughly read those progress reports you're getting from the school or from the clinic or wherever your child might be receiving outside speech services regarding their goals. And if these reports don't give you enough detailed information, feel free to call and ask or email and just ask for that information. And if you don't understand why a goal is important, or if you aren't seeing changes from benchmark to benchmark, ask for clarification on all of that. And I'm sure the therapist is happy to explain exactly what that might look like on their end. Before an IEP meeting, it's really important to review the past IEP, those progress reports, and the draft of the IEP, and thinking about what progress do you want to see your child make towards those goals. What do you want them to be able to do? How might this look different at home versus at school? Because I think that is frequently something that comes up, is sometimes behaviors or skills will look different at home than at school for a plethora of different reasons, but that is always something to kind of keep in mind. But also trying to figure out how can we get that streamlined, that skills kind of streamlined across multiple settings. and how can the school team help you achieve this at home. And if you want to see certain goals worked on, think of how this ties into their daily routine at school, even if it's if it's not academic in nature, the goal that you want to see. Think of how it impacts their ability to make their wants and needs known throughout the day. Does it impact their ability to attend or follow directions, or does it affect their confidence and frustration? Because all of those can be tied in with those academic goals that the schools need to kind of follow in order to set those as goals. So also asking how they can incorporate that into your students' accommodations might be really important also, because even if they can't work on it directly, they can maybe add an accommodation for that. And if you aren't seeing the progress that you would expect, speak with the team to ask what a typical session might look like. And, maybe asking for a few minute video recording of their session just to see how it looks and how they are able to be successful with that goal, or vice versa. Maybe you can send a video of you working on it at home and asking for feedback. So those are some easy ways to kind of get information on that progress and how to kind of streamline that across multiple settings. And then if you are seeing the progress you want and want to build more on that, you should make sure to ask the team and the speech therapist what the next logical step would be with enhancing that skill. So you want to ask for suggestions on ways to carry the skill over at home as well, if we're not seeing it across multiple settings. Using the same visuals, boards, token reward charts, all of that can be easy ways to help with that carryover of those skills. And kind of thinking through what your biggest takeaway of this presentation was, and if you have any questions. And real quick, this is just our speech team, and if you're interested in any speech services, you can send an email to request for GLOW. We all work on a variety of different skills here in the speech area, and are also happy to answer any questions you might have about this presentation, either now or at a later date. So if does anybody have any questions?
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Caeli. That was wonderful and so informative. Are there any, Laura's got her hand raised. Laura, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I didn't want to type it because it's a long question. Obviously, when your child has behavior therapy or behavior issues, behavior therapy always helps with that speech, because if you don't address the behavior, you're not going to get your child to speak. Are there other therapies that can help with speech? For example, like music therapy, art therapy, like what other therapies can help with speech?
Yeah, I think those two examples you just gave are great examples. Just depending on the kids' interests, I think music and art therapy are both great options. It really just depends on kind of what motivates them and what their biggest motivators are to help them communicate. I would look at that first and that being the main question you would ask yourself before providing one of those services, is like, what really motivates your kid to communicate, and like looking at that behavior side, use different behavior strategies and techniques. And I think all those disciplines, behavior, music therapy, art therapy, they all are somewhat well-versed in all of those behaviors. Obviously behavior therapy is, but as well as speech, and music therapy, they all know how to kind of implement some of those strategies. And that's what's great too, is they can use what, you might want them to implement from behavior services into their sessions also. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so if for example, a child has cognitive and executive functioning issues, they're going to have a lot of speech issues as well. So how do you address that area to help your child with speech delays?
Mm-hmm. I think getting more, like knowing a little more specifics of the situation might help me answer that a little bit more. Like we do work on some of those skills like attention or memory and things like that. And that kind of helps inform how we work on some of the other skills as well as working on it directly. But I would really have to know kind of, that's a broad question to be able to, answer without specifics, unless I like knew the child you're talking about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laura, so much. Are there any other questions before we say goodbye for the night? Okay, if that's the case, we're just going to go ahead and sign off tonight. Everyone, thank you so much for joining once again to this Grow presentation. Thank you, Caeli, again for your time and for your expertise this evening. And we will see everyone next time on Grow. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye.
Bye.